Welcome, brave souls, to Night Creepypasta Rules. Tonight we invite you into the Athenaeum, a night library with 3 strange rules you must follow to survive. Mate Alistair Finch, the new librarian, about to discover that some books are better left unread, and some rules are written in blood. This is one you must watch until the end for a twist that will claw its way into your nightmares. Ready to face the dark? Let me know your first thoughts on this chilling premise in the comments. And if you're brave enough for more, subscribe now. Let the terror begin. The silence in the Athenaeum wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a presence in itself, weighted with the unspoken histories of 1,000 forgotten bloodlines, and the dry, rustling scent of secrets bound in ancient vellum. It pressed in on me as I pushed open the towering Yukondoak doors for my first official night shift. The grand old clock in the shadowy foyer, chiming a mournful 10. Providence, Rhode Island, a city steeped in colonial ghosts and Lovecraftian whispers, felt like a fitting backdrop for this new, desperate chapter of my life. My life as Mr. Alistair Finch, a name I was still trying to inhabit, a flimsy shield against the wreckage of my former academic career, and the long shadow of debts that clung to me like a second skin. The main reading room was a cathedral of hushed reverence, its soaring vaulted ceiling lost in darkness far above, the towering shelves disappearing into gloomy alcoves. The air, cool and still, carried the unmistakable aroma of centuries of accumulated knowledge. Old paper, decaying leather, polished wood, and something else, a faint, almost imperceptible sweetness, like dried flowers pressed between the pages of a forgotten grimoire. It was a scent I knew well, a scent that had once been my lifeblood, before my indiscretions. A forged provenance here, a rediscovered manuscript there, the desperate measures of a man whose intellect outstripped his ethics and aggravated his creditors. My predecessor, a Mr. Silas Blackwood, had apparently retired with a suddenness that bordered on vanishing. His desk, a massive mahogany affair in a secluded alcove designated as the night librarian station, was unnervingly neat. Upon its polished surface lay a single cream-colored card, exquisitely thick, the text upon it typed with an old-fashioned, slightly uneven ribbon. To Mr. A. Finch, it began, the formality chilling. Welcome to the Athenaeum. Welcome to the Athenaeum. Your duties are outlined in the staff manual. However, certain operational nuances, vital for the preservation of our collection and the well-being of our nocturnal staff, are best communicated directly. Adherence is not merely requested. It is essential. 1. Should a patron request materials pertaining to bloodlines, familial succession, or the quest for longevity, and should said patron exhibit an unusual pallor, accompanied by notably sharp or elongated canine teeth, your interaction is to be polite, efficient, but unequivocally brief. Do not engage in prolonged discourse. Provide requested materials with discretion and dispatch. My breath hitched. This was no ordinary library. 2. The Collins family genealogy, located in the West Wing's secure stacks, is a volume of particular sensitivity. Under no circumstances is it to be retrieved, consulted, or allowed to leave its designated shelf after sunset. Its nocturnal disposition is volatile. A shiver traced its way down my spine. Volatile. For a genealogy. 3. On occasion, a patron may inquire, often in hushed tones, if the individual known historically as the Boston Strangler, or any similar notorious personage, has returned borrowed materials of late. You are to inform them, politely but firmly, that all patron accounts and borrowing histories are strictly confidential. Do not confirm or deny. Do not speculate. The order of this archive is maintained through diligent adherence. Curiosity, Mr. Finch, can accrue a debt that no currency can settle. Sincerely, the Curator. No signature, just that impersonal, authoritative title. I reread the rules, each one more unsettling than the last. This wasn't merely a job. It was an initiation into something far older, far stranger than I had bargained for. But the wolves were at my door, both literal and metaphorical. I needed this. A soft shuffling sound from the far end of the reading room made me jump. A young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, was emerging from the shadowed recesses of the history section. A stack of heavy tomes clutched in her arms. She had an air of quiet intensity. Her dark hair pulled back severely. Her eyes, even in the dim light, sharp and intelligent as she looked up. Clearly surprised by my presence, there was an almost palpable aura of focused intellect about her, the kind I recognized and had once possessed myself before desperation had clouded my judgment. "Oh," she said, her voice soft but clear, a slight frown creasing her brow. "I didn't realize Mr. Blackwood had been replaced so swiftly. You must be the new Night Librarian." She didn't offer her name, nor I mine beyond what the card had proclaimed. "Indeed," I replied, forcing a professional tone. "Mr. Finch, Alistair Finch, at your service." I gestured vaguely towards the desk. "And you are?" "A visiting researcher," she said, her gaze sweeping over me, lingering for a moment on my slightly shabby suit. My undoubtedly tired eyes. There was a hint of cool assessment in her look, perhaps even suspicion. Understandable. Night owls in a place like the Athenaeum were likely a peculiar breed. "Eleanor Vance, I'm working on my dissertation, Providences, Less Illuminated Corners of Colonial History. A fascinating field," I managed, though my mind was still reeling from the Curator's cryptic admonitions. Less illuminated corners. She had no idea. We stood in an awkward silence for a moment, the weight of the library's ancient secrets pressing down. Her scrutiny made me uncomfortable, as if she could somehow sense the ghosts of my own less than illuminated past. "Well, Mr. Finch," she said finally, her tone polite but distant, "I trust your tenure here will be quiet." She gave a curt nod and retreated towards a reading table in a distant alcove, the rustle of her movements quickly absorbed by the vast listening silence of the Athenaeum. I watched her go, a strange sense of unease settling over me. Eleanor Vance. There was something about her, a keenness, a scholarly hunger that reminded me of myself before the fall. And her presence, another solitary soul, adrift in this ocean of forgotten words, only amplified the isolation, the feeling that I had stepped not just into a job, but into a meticulously set, very old trap. The scent of aged vellum and unspoken stories filled my nostrils, and I had the distinct, chilling premonition that the debts I was trying to escape were nothing compared to the ones that might be accrued within these hallowed, haunted walls. The ensuing nights at the Athenaeum settled into a strange, disconcerting rhythm. The silence, as I'd first perceived, was indeed a living entity, punctuated by the soft rustle of turning pages from Eleanor Vance's distant corner, the sigh of the ancient heating system, and inexplicable creaks from the towering, shadow-laden stacks that seemed to watch my every move. The scent of old vellum and that faint, sweet undertone, like fading ink or perhaps something more organic, like dried blood pressed between leaves, became a constant companion. My primary duty, it seemed, was to be a silent sentinel, a largely unseen cog in a machine whose true purpose remained frustratingly obscure. The Curator's rules, however, were never far from my mind. It was on my third night that the first rule bared its fangs. The heavy oak doors creaked open, admitting a figure who seemed to absorb the already dim light of the foyer. He was tall, dressed in impeccably tailored, dark clothing that looked out of place, even in this sanctuary of arcane knowledge. His skin, visible in the pale glow of my desk lamp, possessed an unnatural, almost translucent pallor, like fine porcelain held against a flame. And his eyes, they were a startling, luminous crimson, fixing on me with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. "Good evening, librarian," he said, his voice a low, cultured rumble, a slight unplaceable accent clinging to his words. "I seek texts pertaining to the longevity of certain noble European lineages, and perhaps, if your collection allows, treatises on the more esoteric methods of preserving vitality." As he spoke, a polite, almost charming smile touched his lips, revealing, for a fleeting instant, canines that were undeniably, unsettlingly sharp. Unusual pallor. Sharp canines. Be polite but brief. The curator's words screamed in my mind. My heart hammered. "Certainly, sir," I managed, my voice a fair imitation of professional calm. "The sections on European aristocracy and early medicinal practices are in the West Wing. Allow me to direct you." I deliberately chose the vaguest, most general sections I could think of, avoiding anything that hinted too closely at immortality or bloodlines. I led him, my own steps feeling heavy and reluctant, towards the cavernous West Wing. The air around him felt demonstrably colder, and a faint, almost imperceptible scent, like cold stone and something vaguely metallic, emanated from him. He moved with a silent, predatory grace. I found a few dusty, innocuous tomes, making a show of consulting the card catalog. Another anachronism in this digital age. "These may be of some initial interest," I said, my voice betraying a slight tremor I despised. He took the books, his long, pale fingers brushing mine. The touch was like ice, sending a jolt through my system. His crimson eyes surveyed me for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable, amusement, disappointment, within their depths. "Your assistance is appreciated, librarian," he murmured, the subtle emphasis on the title making it sound less like a job description and more like a classification. He then glided away into the shadows of the stacks, leaving me feeling drained, chilled to the bone, as if some vital part of myself had been subtly siphoned. Ellen Avance, I noticed, had been observing this exchange from her usual alcove, her expression unreadable. When our eyes met across the vast expanse of the reading room, she quickly looked down, but not before I saw a flicker of what? Pity, or perhaps a shared unspoken understanding of the library's peculiar clientele. Later that week, our interactions began to shift, driven by a mutual, if unspoken, curiosity about the library's secrets, and perhaps by the sheer loneliness of the nocturnal hours. Our conversations became less guarded. She was researching the hidden networks of power in colonial Providence, the merchant families, the secret societies, the whispers of unorthodox beliefs that clung to their histories. I, in turn, feigning a purely academic interest, would ask about her findings, my own knowledge of rare texts and historical undercurrents allowing me to offer occasional, carefully veiled insights. "The Collins family," she mused one night, her brow furrowed in concentration over a faded map of 18th century Providence. "They owned vast swathes of the city, shipping magnates, philanthropists. Yet there are persistent rumors of eccentricities, secluded rituals, a fear of the sun, almost folkloric if it weren't for certain recurring motifs in their private correspondence." Her gaze met mine. "Their family genealogy is meant to be quite comprehensive. The Collins family genealogy. Rule number 2. The air in my alcove suddenly felt colder. Detective Marcus Cole, the retired cop who had become another infrequent but regular nocturnal visitor. chose that moment to amble past. He was a large, rumpled man, with eyes that had seen too much, but still missed nothing. He paused, his gaze resting on the map spread between Eleanor and me. "The Collinses, eh?" he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "Old blood, old secrets. Some say old curses, too. Caused a lot of whispers back in my day. Still do, for those who listen." He gave us a long, penetrating look, then nodded. "Be careful what stones you overturn in this town, kids. Some things are best left buried." He wandered off towards the periodicals, leaving a trail of cigar-scented unease in his wake. That night, driven by a mixture of academic temptation and a growing reckless desire to understand the forces at play in the Athenaeum, I found a small, almost invisible notation in the margins of a tattered acquisitions ledger from the 1920s. Beside an entry for Varney the Vampire, or the Feast of Blood, was a scribbled name, L. Collins, and a question, a cautionary tale, or a family memoir. The chill that had settled in my bones after encountering the Pale Patron returned with a vengeance. My fascination with the Collins family genealogy grew into a low-grade obsession. The Curator's explicit prohibition, Eleanor's casual but pointed interest, and Detective Cole's cryptic warnings only served to fan the flames. The volume itself, glimpsed through the reinforced glass of its locked cabinet in the West Wing's secure stacks, was an imposing, almost malevolent presence, bound in what looked like blackened, age-cracked leather, its clasps thick. It fairly pulsed with an aura of sequestered knowledge. What secrets did it hold? What volatile disposition did it possess after dark? My past, with its illicit dealings in rare and sometimes forbidden texts, had equipped me with a certain skill set. Lockpicking, alas, was not among them, or at least not at the level required for the Athenaeum's robust security. But I was an expert at observing routines, at finding forgotten keys, at understanding the subtle currents of a cloistered environment. The opportunity presented itself on an evening when a rare early autumn thunderstorm was battering Providence. The rhythmic drumming of rain against the tall arched windows, and the occasional dramatic clap of thunder, created a cocoon of sound, a perfect cover. Miss Vance, looking unusually distracted and perhaps a little flustered by the storm, approached my desk just as the last bruised rays of sunlight were surrendering to the bruised indigo sky. "Mr. Finch," she began, her voice a little breathless. "I know it's unorthodox, and probably against some arcane rule I'm not privy to. But would it be utterly impossible to just have a quick look at the Collins genealogy tonight? I've hit a wall with my research on the shipping routes, and I have a hunch. Just a hunch that there might be a crucial map or manifest detail within its pages. Before sunset, of course," she added quickly, though the sky outside was already darkening ominously. "Rule number 2. Under no circumstances is it to be retrieved after sunset." Sunset was, at that very moment, a dying ember on the horizon. My internal alarm bells were clanging. But Eleanor's request, the first time she had asked me for a direct favor, combined with my own burning curiosity and a perverse desire to push the boundaries the Curator had set, was a potent cocktail. "Perhaps if I was quick." "The secure stacks require a specific key, Miss Vance," I said, stalling, my gaze fixed on the fading light. "And the lighting in that wing is unreliable. But let me see what I can do." I fumbled for the ring of master keys, my gaze flicking towards the grandfather clock in the foyer. 5 minutes 10 at most, before true darkness fell. As I unlocked the heavy grill gate to the secure stacks, a low rumble of thunder shook the building. The air within the narrow, towering aisles was noticeably colder, the scent of dust and decay more pronounced. The Collins genealogy sat on its designated shelf, a dark monolith. I reached for it, The moment my fingers touched the cold, cracked leather, the sun, as if on cue, dipped fully below the horizon. The last vestige of natural light vanished from the tall UN condo in the West Wing. Simultaneously, the single bare bulb illuminating our aisle flickered violently and died, plunging us into near total blackness. A gasp escaped Eleanor's lips. I felt a sudden, intense pressure in the air, as if the oxygen were being squeezed from the room. Several heavy volumes on the shelves around us crashed to the floor with a deafening series of thuds, one after another, like a malevolent poltergeist announcing its displeasure. The temperature plummeted, and I could see my own breath misting in the frigid air. The Collins genealogy in my hands felt alive. It vibrated faintly, a low, almost inaudible thrumming that resonated up my arms and into my chest. "Mr. Finch," Eleanor's voice was a strained whisper, laced with genuine fear. Perhaps this isn't a good idea." Indeed, I agreed, my own voice hoarse. The unseen, furious presence was palpable, a suffocating blanket of anger. I carefully, reverently placed the tome back on its shelf. The moment it was settled, the oppressive pressure eased slightly. The falling book ceased. The temperature, while still cold, became marginally less arctic. We stumbled out of the secure stacks, the emergency lights in the main reading room casting long, dancing shadows. Eleanor was pale, her usual composure shaken. "I'm sorry, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I shouldn't have asked. There's clearly something about that book." "Clearly," I echoed. The Curator's rules were not arbitrary. They were born of hard, perhaps terrifying, experience. The Sunset Sentinel, whatever it was a potent guardian. Our shared, if unspoken, experience of the book's wrath forged a new, fragile bond between us. The suspicion in Eleanor's eyes was replaced by a wary curiosity, a dawning realization that my role here might be more complex than she'd initially assumed. We found ourselves gravitating towards each other during the long silent hours, sharing observations, speculating in hushed tones about the library's myriad enigmas. The Athenaeum, it seemed, was beginning to share its secrets, whether we wanted them or not. Later that night, tucked inside an old staff manual, I found a faded, typewritten note, clearly from a previous night librarian. "The Collins wards, awakened with the dark, heed the curfew. Their shadows are long, and their hunger for what was lost is eternal." Shadows and hunger. The words sent a fresh wave of dread through me. The atmosphere in the Athenaeum grew perceptibly heavier in the weeks that followed our abortive attempt to consult the Collins genealogy. It was as if our transgression had stirred something, alerted unseen watchers to our burgeoning curiosity. I began to experience disquieting phenomena with increasing frequency during my solitary vigils. Faint, rasping breaths that seemed to emanate from the darkest corners of the stacks. The feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. A prickling sensation on my skin that would make me whirl around, only to find empty aisles and silence. Sometimes, I'd catch a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a fleeting shadow that vanished when I tried to focus on it. The scent of lilies, already an unwelcome undercurrent, now seemed to be joined by a fainter, more acrid odor, like stale cigar smoke or the metallic tang of fear. Eleanor, too, seemed more on edge, her research sessions punctuated by nervous glances over her shoulder. We spoke more often now, our conversations a lifeline in the oppressive quiet, a mutual sounding board for the library's unsettling eccentricities. We pieced together fragments, the pale patrons, the volatile Collins tome, the overarching sense of ancient, guarded secrets. Rule number 3, the strangest and most specific of them all, was invoked on a particularly damp, fog-choked Providence night. The kind of night where the city's colonial ghosts felt particularly close. I was cataloging a new acquisition, a rather morbid collection of Victorian morning jewelry, when the bell above the main entrance tinkled softly. A woman stood there, draped in a heavy, old-fashioned shawl. Despite the mildness of the season, her face, half hidden in the shadows of her hood, was pale and deeply lined, her eyes dark and restless. She clutched a worn, leather-bound satchel to her chest. "Excuse me, librarian," she said, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper that barely carried. A rather delicate inquiry, if I may. She glanced around nervously, as if fearing eavesdroppers even in the vast emptiness of the reading room. "It concerns an old account, Amar DeSalvo. Albert DeSalvo, to understand, he was a frequent visitor here in his time. The Boston Strangler." My blood turned to ice water. This was it. He was known to be an avid reader, she continued, her dark eyes boring into mine, of certain anatomical texts, perhaps, or local histories. I was simply wondering, purely for historical research, you understand, if he might have returned any borrowed materials recently, or if his account still holds any outstanding items. Her question, delivered with such earnest, fearful intensity, hung in the air like a shroud. The name itself, DeSalvo, seemed to conjure a palpable chill. Tell them all accounts are confidential. The curator's rule, clear, unequivocal. "I'm afraid, madam," I said, choosing my words with extreme care, my voice emerging more steadily than I felt, that all patron accounts and borrowing histories at the Athenaeum are strictly confidential. I am unable to disclose any such information. A visible wave of something washed over her face. Was it disappointment or a strange, almost perverse relief? Her shoulders slumped slightly. "Ah, yes, of course. Confidentiality. Quite right." She clutched her satchel tighter. "Forgive my indelicate inquiry." She gave a jerky nod, and then, almost before I could register it, she turned and melted back into the foggy Providence night, leaving behind only the faint scent of lavender and old, unsettled dust. The moment she was gone, a bone-deep chill permeated my alcove. The lights above my desk flickered violently, and I heard a distinct guttural exhalation, like a sigh of immense suffocating weariness, from the shadowy aisle directly behind me, the section dedicated to criminology and forensic pathology. And I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Nothing. Just rows upon rows of silent, leather-bound books. But the distinct impression of a hulking, unseen presence lingered, cold and malevolent. And for a horrifying instant, I thought I smelled the faint, sickeningly sweet odor of decomposing flesh. Eleanor, who had arrived shortly before the woman and had been working quietly in her usual spot, approached my desk, her face pale, a face pale. "Mr. Finch, did you hear that woman about DeSalvo?" I nodded, still shaken. "My research," she said, her voice low. "It's led me to some very dark corners of Providence's history. Whispers of certain elite circles, bibliophile societies they called themselves, who had an unhealthy fascination with the macabre. With the first-hand accounts of predators, the Athenaeum was their preferred meeting place, their private archive for such material. Some say DeSalvo wasn't just a reader here. Some say he was cultivated, or even protected for a time, by those who found his unique perspective useful for their own grim studies." Her words sent a fresh wave of horror through me. The library wasn't just a passive repository of secrets. It was an active participant, A silent witness, perhaps even an enabler. Detective Cole appeared later that night, a grin set to his jaw. He didn't browse the periodicals this time. He came straight to my desk. "Finch," he said, his voice low and urgent. "That woman who was in here earlier, asking about DeSalvo. I saw her leaving. Small, dark shawl, carrying an old satchel." I nodded. "I thought so. That's Esther Perlmutter." Her sister was one of the other victims. The ones they never officially pinned on DeSalvo, but everyone knew. Everyone suspected. Esther's been chasing that ghost for 50 years. His eyes narrowed. This library. It keeps its secrets well. Too well. Some of us still believe DeSalvo didn't act alone. That he... patrons. Of a different sort. His gaze swept the shadowy, silent stacks. A flicker of something akin to frustrated anger in their depths. He then looked directly at me, then at Eleanor, who had remained nearby. "You two, you're stirring up more than just dust in this old place. Be careful. The Athenaeum has a way of collecting dues on overdue curiosity." That night, I found it, tucked into a hidden compartment in the Curator's desk. A compartment I hadn't known existed until a loose floorboard revealed its mechanism. Was a slim file. Its title, typed on the same cream-colored cardstock as the Curator's notes, read, "The Library is Silent Witness. A record of discreet inquiries and unreturned accounts." Inside was a list. Names, dates, and annotations. The Collins family featured prominently. So did several names I recognized from the pale, sharp-toothed patrons. And there, near the bottom, a late entry from the 1960s. A. DeSalvo. Inquiries. Anatomy. Surgical implements. Local geography. Account closed. No materials outstanding. Status. Permanently archived. The phrase had a chilling finality, as if his very soul had been cataloged and shelved within these ancient walls. The discovery of the library as Silent Witness file was a turning point. It was no longer just a collection of unsettling rules and strange encounters. It was a pattern, a horrifying tapestry woven from generations of secrets, discreet inquiries, and perhaps unspeakable acts, all sheltered within the venerable walls of the Athenaeum. Alistair Finch, a disgraced academic running from his debts, now found himself an unwilling archivist of damnation. The oppressive atmosphere in the library intensified further, as if our uncovering of that hidden file had tripped an unseen alarm. The shadowed patrons became more frequent, their requests more specific, more demanding. They no longer just asked for books on longevity or ancient bloodlines. They now sought specific, often unique, grimoires by name. Texts Alistair knew, from his own illicit past, were infamous for their dark power and dangerous rituals. Their crimson eyes seemed to hold a new predatory hunger. Their polite facades wearing dangerously thin. The scent of cold stone and metallic blood was a near-constant presence in the West Wing. Eleanor Vance, now a reluctant co-conspirator, threw herself into her research with a new fevered intensity. Her focus shifted from colonial shipping routes to the Collins family themselves, to the very foundation of the Athenaeum. She discovered that the library wasn't just founded by the Collinses. It was, in a sense, an extension of their family mausoleum, a place to house not just their books, but perhaps their lineage, in a far more literal sense. Whispers in Old Town records spoke of the Collinses' obsession with continuity, with preserving the essence beyond mortal means. Detective Cole, sensing our deepening involvement, began to share more. His professional reticence, overcome by a decades-old frustration, and perhaps a grudging respect for our dangerous persistence. He revealed that the unsolved cases from his past, the ones that still haunted him, all had tenuous, almost invisible threads leading back to the Athenaeum. A missing person last seen researching a rare text, an unexplained death of a scholar who had delved too deeply into certain sensitive collections. He suspected the Curator, whoever they were, was not just a librarian, but a gatekeeper, a protector of secrets far more sinister than overdue books. The tipping point came on a night heavy with impending snow, the air outside still and charged. One of the most powerful of the shadowed patrons, the tall, crimson-eyed man Alistair had first encountered, who introduced himself now with a chillingly courteous smile as Mr. Kalen, cornered Alistair in the secure stacks. Eleanor was working late, a rare occurrence, ostensibly to finish a crucial section of her dissertation, though Alistair suspected she was there as much for mutual protection as for research. "Mr. Finch," Kalen purred, his voice like velvet over steel. "Your diligence is noted. However, my patience, unlike certain bloodlines, is not infinite." He produced a small, intricately carved ivory box. Within this lies a request, not for a book this time, but for access to the lower levels, the true archives, specifically the Collins family vault. Tonight, the lower levels. Alistair hadn't even known they existed. "I'm afraid, Mr. Kalen," Alistair said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in his hands, "that such access is beyond my authority." The Curator. Kalen's smile widened, his sharp canines glinting. "The Curator," he interrupted smoothly, "is merely an administrator, a tradition. The true power here resides with those who understand the value of the collection, and with those." His crimson eyes flicked towards Eleanor, who had emerged silently from a nearby aisle, her face pale but resolute, who hold the keys, by blood or by burden. Before Alistair could react, Kalen moved with a speed that belied his urbane demeanor, seizing Eleanor by the arm, his grip like an iron vice. "Miss Vance, isn't it? Or should I say, Miss Collins Vance?" The last fading echo of a once vibrant lineage. "Your great-aunt, the previous Curator, was far more accommodating." The twist. Eleanor, the Curator, wasn't some faceless entity communicating through notes. It was her, or rather, a role she was unwillingly, terrifyingly bound to. The bloodline, the burden. The rules weren't just for him. They were the desperate, failing attempts of generations of Collinses to manage the unmanageable. Eleanor winced, but her eyes met Kalen's with a spark of defiance. "The vault is sealed for a reason, Kalen. What's within is not for you. It was never meant for any of you. But sentimentality has no place in the pursuit of true longevity, my dear." Kalen sighed, his gaze now fixed on Alistair. "The vault, Finch. Now, or your scholarly companion will find her research permanently concluded." The threat hung in the frigid air. Alistair's mind raced. The Collins genealogy, volatile after sunset. The Strangler's lingering shadow. The Curator's cryptic file. It all coalesced into a horrifying whole. The Athenaeum was a prison, a feeding ground, and Eleanor was its reluctant jailer, its sacrificial offering. "The vault," Eleanor said, her voice strained but firm, looking at Alistair. "It can only be opened willingly by a Collins who understands the litany of warding, but it can be forced by one who knows the litany of unmaking. A counter-ritual?" Kalen zixed a grimoire hidden there. "The Somnium Sanguinis, the dream of blood. It supposedly grants true immortality beyond their current half-life." Detective Cole's sudden appearance was like a thunderclap. Was like a thunderclap. He emerged from the shadows of a towering bookshelf, his service revolver steady in his hand, his face a mask of grim determination. "Let her go, Kalen." This isn't a library. It's a crime scene generations in the making. And tonight, the books are closed. Kalen merely chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Detective Cole, still chasing shadows after all these years. How quaint. He tightened his grip on Eleanor, and Alistair saw her gasp in pain. The litany of unmaking, Alistair repeated, his academic mind latching onto Eleanor's words, even as fear threatened to paralyze him. He'd seen references to such counter-rituals in some of the more obscure texts he'd acquired in his past. Destructive, dangerous, but potent. Eleanor, if Kalen knows it, he can use you, even against your will, to open it if he gets close enough to the vault's threshold. An idea, desperate and reckless, sparked in Alistair's mind. The Collins genealogy. Its volatile disposition after sunset. A guardian. Call, Alistair yelled. The genealogy, in its cabinet. If Kalen gets what he wants from the vault, none of us are safe. Distract him. Cole, understanding the unspoken urgency, fired a shot. Not at Kalen, but at a heavy gas lamp high on the wall nearby. A relic from the library's earlier days. It exploded in a shower of sparks and glass, momentarily plunging their section into deeper shadow and chaos. In that instant of confusion, Alistair sprinted towards the main control panel near his desk. Eleanor had once shown him an emergency override, a way to trigger a full lockdown of the secure stacks, including, he prayed, whatever wards protected the Collins family vault and its guardian, Kalen. Enraged by the gunshot and the sudden darkness, threw Eleanor aside and lunged towards where he thought Alistair was headed, the vault. But Alistair wasn't going to the vault. He was going for the library's oldest, most intrinsic defense, the Strangler. Alistair roared into the darkness, his voice echoing through the cavernous library, hoping to trigger whatever residual psychic energy, whatever echo of that past horror, might still linger. Has Albert Desalvo returned any books on unmaking? He threw the name out like a desperate incantation, a perversion of the third rule. A guttural shriek, not from Kalen, but from the very air around them, answered him. The temperature plummeted further. The scent of stale cigars and something far worse, the metallic tang of old, spilled blood, filled the stacks. A hulking, indistinct shadow, darker than the surrounding gloom, seemed to detach itself from the criminology section. A whisper of pure, undirected malevolence. It wasn't Desalvo himself, but the library's memory of him, the psychic scar tissue of his heinous acts, given momentary, terrifying form. Kalen faltered, his crimson eyes wide with a surprise that bordered on fear as this new, unexpected horror manifested. The shadowed patrons were ancient, powerful, but they were creatures of intellect and arcane knowledge. This was raw, primal, human evil, a psychic stain they clearly hadn't anticipated. Eleanor, recovering quickly, saw her chance. The genealogy, Alistair, she cried. Its guardian awakens with the true dark, and only a Collins. She didn't need to finish. She was a Collins, and it was well past sunset. While the Strangler's shadow momentarily distracted Kalen and his few advancing cohorts, Alistair reached the main circulation desk. He didn't have the key to the Collins Tome's cabinet, but he knew where the emergency release for all secure cabinets was. A relic of older fire codes. He slammed his hand down on it with a series of loud mechanical clunks. Every locked cabinet in the secure stacks sprang open, and from the depths of the West Wing, from the direction of the now open Collins family genealogy cabinet, came a sound that was not a whisper, not a groan, but a deep, resonant, earth-shattering roar of pure, ancestral rage. The Sunset Sentinel was awake, and it was furious. The roar that erupted from the west wing was unlike anything Alistair had ever heard. A primal, guttural bellow that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Athenaeum. It was the sound of centuries of pent-up fury, of a bloodline's protective instinct made manifest. The Sunset Sentinel, the guardian of the Collins family genealogy, was no mere atmospheric disturbance. It was a force, ancient and terrible. Kaelon and his shadowed patrons, momentarily frozen by the unexpected manifestation of the Strangler's psychic echo, now recoiled in genuine terror as this new, more potent threat announced itself. The hulking, indistinct shadow of the Strangler, chaotic and undirected in its malice, seemed to almost hesitate, as if acknowledging a superior predator in this haunted domain. A wave of intense cold, far colder than Kaelin's presence, swept through the library, extinguishing the remaining gas lamps and plunging the vast space into an even deeper, more Stygian darkness, relieved only by the weak emergency lights and the distant, flickering street lamps outside. From the direction of the Collins Tome, a pair of luminous emerald-green eyes ignited in the blackness, burning with an ancient, intelligent fury. The air filled with the scent of freshly turned earth, ancient leather, and the undeniable metallic tang of spilled blood. But this was a different blood, older, more primal. The old man of the stacks. Detective Cole breathed, his voice tight with a forgotten childhood fear. My grandmother used to scare us with stories. A guardian bound to the Collins blood, awakened only by great peril or desecration after dark. Kaelin, his urbane composure utterly shattered, let out a strangled cry. This was not foreseen. The grimoire spoke only of wards, of subtle deterrents. He and his cohorts began to back away, their predatory confidence replaced by a frantic urgency to escape. But the antechamber to whatever hell they hailed from seemed to have closed. The Strangler's echo, though momentarily overshadowed, still lingered, a barrier of pure human malevolence. And now the Collins Sentinel advanced, not as a shadow, but as a towering, vaguely humanoid form composed of swirling dust from ancient tomes, coalesced whispers, and those two burning, implacable emerald eyes. It moved with a slow, ponderous, and utterly unstoppable gait. One of Kaelin's companions, a woman with skin like bleached parchment, shrieked and tried to flee, only to be enveloped by the Strangler's shadow, her cry abruptly cut short. Another, a younger man with the same crimson eyes as Kaelin, was swatted aside by an unseen force emanating from the Collins Sentinel, crashing into a bookshelf with a sickening thud. Alistair and Eleanor, flattened against a row of encyclopedias, watched in horrified awe. This was a battle of monsters, a turf war in a library of unspeakable secrets. Eleanor, Alistair whispered, his voice hoarse, the litany of warding. Can you? She shook her head, her face pale but resolute. It's too late for warding. This is a reckoning. The library is cleansing itself. My role, my only role now, is to ensure the right secrets remain buried. Her eyes, for a moment, held a flicker of that ancient Collins authority. The Curator's burden, Kaelon, saying his escape routes cut off by two distinct, equally terrifying supernatural forces, made a desperate lunge for the ivory box containing his request, which had skittered across the floor during the chaos. He clearly believed whatever was in the Somnium Sanguinis was his only hope. But Eleanor was faster. She kicked the box away, sending it sliding into the deepest shadows beneath a towering shelf of forgotten philosophies. No more dreams of blood, Kaelin, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. The Athenaeum has had its fill. The Collins Sentinel, its emerald eyes fixed on Kaelin, the ultimate transgressor against its charge, let out another earth-shattering roar. The Strangler's echo seemed to almost recoil, then dissipate, as if its own dark energy was being absorbed or overwhelmed by the sheer, focused rage of the library's true guardian. Kaelan screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror, as the Sentinel descended upon him. The details were lost in the swirling dust and darkness, but the sounds, the rending of fabric, the snapping of bone, a final, choked gurgle, were sickeningly clear. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The roaring stopped. The emerald eyes faded. The oppressive cold began to recede, slowly, almost reluctantly. The Athenaeum fell into a profound silence, deeper and more absolute than any Alistair had yet experienced. It was the silence of a tomb after the grave robbers had been dealt with. Detective Cole let out a shaky breath. Mother of God. Eleanor sagged against a bookshelf, her face ashen, but her eyes held a new weary strength. Oh, the Sentinel. It will sleep again now. Until the next transgression. Alistair looked around the devastated library, overturned shelves, scattered books, the faint, lingering scent of ancient dust, and something else, something coppery and final. The immediate threat was gone, but the knowledge of what lay dormant within these walls, what forces were bound to its ancient stones and vellum pages, would remain. The Curator's rules were not just guidelines. They were the thin, frayed threads holding back a tide of unimaginable horrors. And one of those threads, it seemed, had just snapped and re-knotted itself in a new, terrifying way. The dawn that crept through the grimy, shattered windows of the Athenaeum was gray and unforgiving, illuminating the full extent of the night's carnage. Books lay scattered, like fallen soldiers, shelves askew, and a fine layer of ancient dust, disturbed by the spectral battle, coated everything of Kaelan and his unfortunate companion. There was no trace, save for a few dark, viscous stains on the marble floor that rapidly faded as the first true light hit them, and the lingering coppery scent that even now was dissipating. The Collins Sentinel had been thorough. Detective Cole, with a Sisyphusian sigh, began the unenviable task of concocting a believable story. A gas leak, perhaps. A localized tremor. Vandals of a particularly enthusiastic sort. Anything but the truth. The ivory box Kaelan had carried was gone, swallowed by the library's shadows, its contents unknown, its potential for future horror, a lingering, unspoken dread. Eleanor Vance, or perhaps Eleanor Collins Vance, the Curator, moved through the wreckage with a strange newfound inconsciency. The terror of the night was still etched on her face, but beneath it was a layer of grim acceptance, the weary inconsciency of one who has finally, irrevocably, embraced a terrible inheritance. The rules of the Athenaeum were no longer just a set of obscure directives. They were her life's work, her family's ancient, cursed legacy. "He will return, you know," she said quietly to Alistair, as they stood amidst the debris of the West Wing, near the now closed and once more locked cabinet of the Collins family genealogy. The book itself looked utterly innocuous, just an old, leather-bound tome. Not Kaelan, perhaps, but others like him. They always do. The scent of forbidden knowledge is too strong a lure. "And the Sentinel?" Alistair asked, his voice still hoarse. "It sleeps," Eleanor said, "as it has for generations, until the next time its charge is threatened, or one of its own blood commands it with sufficient understanding." Her gaze met his, and he saw a flicker of that Collins authority, but also a profound loneliness. "The library endures, Mr. Finch. It always endures. It is a collector, not just of books, but of stories. And sometimes it collects the storytellers too." The implication was clear. His own past, his own precarious financial and legal situation, had made him vulnerable, drawn him into the Athenaeum's orbit. And now, having witnessed its deepest, darkest secrets, having played a crucial, if unwilling, role in its violent self-preservation, he was inextricably bound to it. Detective Cole surprisingly offered Alistair a way out, a quiet word in the right ears, a recommendation for a research position at a mundane university library far from Providence, a chance to disappear and start again. Truly anonymous this time. It was a generous offer, a lifeline, but as Alistair looked around the ancient, silent and consty of the Athenaeum, at the towering shelves filled with forgotten wisdom and unspoken horrors, at Eleanor, her face pale but resolute as she began the monumental task of restoring order, he felt a strange, unsettling pull. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A perverse fascination, the scholar's insatiable hunger for knowledge. However dangerous, and perhaps a reluctant sense of belonging. He had faced down demons, both literal and metaphorical, within these walls. And he had survived. He made his decision. Weeks turned into months. Alistair Finch remained the night librarian of the Athenaeum. He and Eleanor, the new, acknowledged Curator, forged an uneasy but effective partnership. The rules remained, now recited with a shared, grim understanding. They cataloged the forbidden, guarded the cursed, and occasionally dealt with unusual patrons, though none as overtly threatening as Kalen. The Strangler's echo still sometimes brushed past in the criminology section, a cold sigh in the darkness. The Sunset Sentinel remained dormant, its presence a comforting, if terrifying, assurance. Alistair's debts were quietly restructured by unknown benefactors with an interest in the Athenaeum's continued discreet operation. His past, while not erased, was now simply another volume in the library's vast, shadowed collection. Sometimes late at night, when the city outside was asleep, and the only sound was the rustle of turning pages, Eleanor, ever the scholar, still conducted her research, though now with a far more cautious, informed perspective. Alistair would walk the silent stacks. He would feel the weight of centuries, the whisper of countless stories, the proximity of unimaginable knowledge and unthinkable terror. He knew the Athenaeum was a dangerous place, a nexus of forces best left undisturbed. He knew that Kalen was likely not the last of his kind, that other, older, hungrier things might still lurk in the deepest recesses of the collection, or be drawn to its ancient power. But he also knew that some books, some knowledge, required a particular kind of guardian, one who understood the allure of the forbidden, the price of secrets, and the necessity of rules, however strange. And as he sat at his mahogany desk, the single lamp casting a small pool of light in the vast, echoing darkness, Mr. Alistair Finch, the disgraced academic, the indebted fugitive, would sometimes allow himself a small, grim smile. He was, after all, merely the night librarian. And the library, as always, had its dues. The whispers among the stacks were now a familiar, if chilling, lullaby. And so, the dawn has broken over the Athenaeum, revealing not peace, but the aftermath of a reckoning. You've stayed until the end. You've witnessed the unraveling of the Curator's chilling rules, the clash of ancient forces, and the terrifying truth buried within a bloodline. The twist, the revelation about Eleanor, about the true nature of the Athenaeum. Did it leave you breathless? Did the secrets of the Collins family send a shiver down your spine? This was a creepypasta that dug deep, unearthing horrors that linger long after the final page. What are your thoughts on Alistair's fate? On Eleanor's burden? On the chilling truth of the Athenaeum's collection? The comments section below is your sanctuary to process the fear, to share your theories, to connect with others who have walked these haunted halls with you tonight. Let the whispers among the stacks continue in our discussions. Remember, this was a video designed to pull you into the darkness, to reveal a twist you wouldn't see coming. If you found yourself utterly captivated, if the hairs on the back of your neck were raised, then know that there are more secrets waiting. The Athenaeum may have had its reckoning tonight, but the world of Night Creepypasta Rules is vast and filled with countless untold horrors. Don't let this be your only journey into the unknown. Subscribe now and become a permanent resident of our nocturnal realm. Click the notification bell and never again miss an invitation to face the things that lurk just beyond the veil. Thank you for daring to listen to the strange rules of the Athenaeum. The night is still young, and the shadows, they are ever present.